Hello, welcome to Global Connections. I'm the guest host today, David Lanou. I'm the Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Hawaii Pacific University, and I'm filling in for Carlos Juarez for the second straight week. Last week when we got together, I said that I wanted to think globally but talk locally, and we're going to do that a little bit again today. As I mentioned last week, HPU has a very important event coming up, Homelessness Awareness Week. It's going to go from March 27th to April 2nd. It's going to involve policymakers, educators, social workers, health professionals, artists. We're going to show the film The Soloist. We're going to show a wonderful play that was written by the homeless and organized by one of the HPU professors. So it's going to be a great week, and we'll talk a little more about that later on. But right now, I want to start by looking again at homelessness from another perspective. We said last week we were going to try to put a more human face on homelessness. And now I have a guest who's experienced working with the homeless in 3 different cities. He's an anthropologist at Hawaii Pacific University, Dr. Topher Erickson. Topher, thanks so much for being here.
Yep, thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your experience in these 3 cities. How did you start out working with the homeless?
Well, thanks for having me be here, first of all. My experience was, I guess you could call it serendipitous. I ended up being asked to share my experience. I had struggled with things in my youth in an alternative high school in Minneapolis, which is where I'm from. They asked me to come and tell my story to a group there, sort of a support group in an alternative high school setting. And then from there, they asked me to stay on and to continue to work with them. And at that point in my life, I didn't have any education. So I went to the community college in Minneapolis and got a degree in human services. And one of the first places that I worked as an intern was a homeless youth shelter. It was a runaway and homeless youth program called The Bridge for Runaway Youth. And it was there that I began to sort of first learn even the term throwaway youth and homeless youth. Although homelessness at the time, this was in the early 90s, in Minneapolis, homelessness wasn't really if you'd like, a fundable issue. It was more runaway and throwaway youth that we served. But that started to change, and I was sort of in that community as that change unfolded. And as I changed in my role at that agency, I started to do more direct services with people that were homeless or considered homeless, and these are folks that for whatever reason are not reunifiable with their parents. Again, the population was 21 and under, so we dealt with 18-year-olds who potentially couldn't go home, and we couldn't force them home. So it created a new sort of problem in terms of services. And homelessness, at least in Minnesota at that time, and homeless youth in particular, became a problem that we could start to actually contribute services, monies, et cetera, to. And that was really where I began my work with this population.
And so your experience with the homeless in Minneapolis really helped to kind of craft your career plans, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was, again, not something I would have ever anticipated that I'd be doing what I'm doing now in anthropology. But yeah, after several years in that, I worked at that agency, and then I moved to another organization, Lutheran Social Services, actually across the river in St. Paul. And there I supervised 3 different youth programs. One was a shelter, a homeless shelter, and then the others were reunification. Was out off the boat now. It was all about dealing directly with youth where there were and not reunifying them with their families. So the other 2 programs were a transitional living program where we would help give them money so that they could live independently. And then lastly was a 3rd program that was about ongoing services and outreach programs, so that we would just continue to deliver outreach programs in the community. Eventually, I went back to school, and I studied anthropology and not social work after having done the work for about 9 years. And that really has changed the trajectory of my life, and ended up in Washington, D.C., studying my graduate work in anthropology and also working with the homeless youth community there.
At American University?
At American University.
And let's talk a little bit about how working with the homeless brought you into anthropology. I think most people, when they think of anthropology, they think of Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
They think anthropologists are the folks who go out and do the digs and find the bones and that sort of thing. But there's also a branch called cultural anthropology that people are less familiar with. So maybe tie a little bit what you were doing in Minneapolis to your interest in anthropology.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. It's true. Anthropology has these subfields and these subdisciplines, and obviously archaeology tends to be the most popular. What I think for me, and my enthusiasm about anthropology was a direct link to my experience as a social worker. I thought when I started to learn about cultural and social anthropology, which is really the study of contemporary societies, and historically, it used to be about going to the exotic, right? Going to these places far away and learning things about people that we don't know about. But the lens of anthropology has really shifted, and it's turned back on itself, and it's saying we don't need to look at least in my experience and in my experience with American University, race, gender, and social justice in America was just defined as reasonable place to do my research as it would be for me to go abroad or to do some other quote-unquote exotic space. So for me, the connection was really straightforward. I already had a deep relationship and commitment to a particular subaltern group, right? The people living in poverty, and particularly youth. That the connection was very simple to me. And fortunately, the discipline itself is turning its lens around, saying that it's more than reasonable for us to be looking at our own culture using the same tools that we might to learn about others.
So you worked with the homeless in Minneapolis. You worked and studied with them in Washington, D.C.,
Yep.
and your dissertation was actually on Hawaii.
Yes.
And let me get the name right. Hawaiian Resilience, Social Movements, Social Work, and Nonprofits. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so, what happened for me is that in keeping with the anthropological trend, I needed to go somewhere far away. And for me, at that point, Hawaii was mighty far. It also had its own indigenous population, which I fumbled on. I had no idea when I came here, which was 2003. I did not know the alarming history of Hawaiians, if you'd like, experience with colonization. I really didn't have that history, and I think most folks that grew up in the U.S. continent don't. So that became, in and of itself, a new story of interest for me. And then what happened is that I thought I would be writing about the homeless youth populations, in particular in Waianae and Waimanalo. I was interested in having the case about homeless youth be something that was an important story that needed to be told. What I discovered was that the context of Hawaii was far more nuanced and far more interesting for me, and it led me, if you'd like, up. Rather than looking down at the homeless youth or the homeless populations, I found myself more curious about the organizations that were caring for them. And then, if you'd like even further, the nonprofit industrial complex is really what I argue, is really a huge player in all of the services that are being delivered.
What do you mean by the nonprofit industrial complex?
I mean the amazing amounts of resources and economic hoops and funds available for any organization that claims to be a nonprofit. There's a litany of ways in which people can characterize their work and their organizations and their agencies as a nonprofit. Most of our social welfare program, if not all, is characterized as nonprofit. And that can include churches, right? It can include universities. So it's a very, very large hoop. So of course my specific focus was more about services that were delivered in social welfare capacity, social work services, and in particular, the Next Step Shelter and Waianae Neighborhood Place, where we saw the context of the nonprofit intersecting with the services that they delivered. And if you'd like, what I discovered, the hoops or the catches and the problems that being a part of that complex, that industrial complex that has all these rules, force them, if you'd like, to behave in those ways. And it's kind of like whoever has your purse strings is ultimately directing what you do.
You get what you incentivize.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So, and any social worker, and as a social worker, of course, I'm very compassionate to the commitment that social workers have as they engage the community. It's really an important distinction, critiquing social workers versus their organizations and the bind that those organizations are in. They're doing the best they can with the resources they have, and those resources are actually allocated in very specific ways. And that is what I looked at in terms of how does that affect the kinds of work that they do and who they work with. And Hawaii obviously has its own complexities about how Hawaiians get services, and that's also a part of that matrix.
Yeah, and you're right. Obviously, Hawaii is a very, very unique situation.
Yeah.
And yet you've worked in Minneapolis, you've worked in Washington, D.C. In what ways might they learn from us, and what ways might we learn from them?
Well, my favorite place ever, of course, is where you come from. And maybe that's for everybody.
Right.
We're all nostalgic about where we came from. And my training as a social worker grew in the birth of a collaborative. And it was a really well thought out collaborative. And I really believe that we talk about consortiums in a lot of environments, and social work organizations do know each other. But the nonprofit piece means that they're also competing for the same funding. And that is a huge, huge controversy, although we don't talk about it necessarily. But if there's funding available, we all know we're writing grants for that same funding, maybe tweaking our version a little bit more to address our missions. But that kind of competitiveness is really, to me, a huge consequence of the context that we're all operating in. I believe that my experience in Minneapolis, they really did a fine job of being open and honest. Now, again, I could be being nostalgic, but they had a genuine collaborative where they shared their resources, they talked about fundraising together, they incorporated in their collaborative a new nonprofit so that they would be working together and sharing those accountabilities and those responsibilities. But most importantly, they built relationships with people on the street in a collaborative from varying different agencies. To me, that's unheard of. I've not seen it done anywhere else. And to me, that was, they did a fantastic job.
So was Minneapolis really ahead of other places in the country on this? I mean, because I would think Minneapolis, you have a really unique situation there in that you have a winter that's very deadly.
Yeah.
And so the stakes obviously are high everywhere, but in some place like Minneapolis, the stakes are especially high because you have to respond to the needs during the winter season.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's unfair to say that every location doesn't have its own pitfalls.
Of course.
But yes, it's true. You can't be without shelter in Minneapolis in February. It's just, you won't make it the night, right? So yeah, there is a more an urgency in that regard. But yeah, I think that they, not to discount these other environments, I think, again, my experience was that there was something about this collaborative that they really understood that we had to deliver services together. We couldn't be fighting for quote unquote clients. Not that that's what anybody's ever doing, but the relationship building, when you and I are doing outreach together and you work for an organization and I work for an organization and the client or the potential client sees the two of us or has a relationship with you but not with me and then walks into my agency and sees me and says, hey, I saw him on the street, it created a kind of community that was vital when dealing with building relationships with people that were living on the street. So for those reasons, that kind of cooperation and collaboration was vital to their success.
So now you have actually studied social services in other countries.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So yeah, I did some work in Bangladesh about development and again also what they would call NGOs, which we call nonprofits, they call NGOs, non-governmental organizations. And the context outside of the United States is always alarming. If you've been to any undeveloped countries, it can really knock your socks off in terms of the kinds of desperation that you can see. Right. There too, my thesis holds water. The best way to make money in Bangladesh is to start an NGO. And it's a really sure bet that if you can create a positive NGO, you can rally resources and make them available to you. So in my studying there, the smaller the NGO, it seemed like the better equipped it was to deliver the services it suggested. The larger NGOs like the Grameen Bank, which are a very, very significant NGO, which has a lot of publicity, and people may even know about the Grameen Bank, microcredit, and all of those different features that supposedly are dealing with villagers and poverty in these really uppity ways, tend to have really negative consequences in the village community. So that was something that I discovered. Not something that people wanted to hear either. People like the story that NGOs are useful in all contexts in developing countries, but I found otherwise.
Well, let's take a break right now, and I hope you'll stay with us for the next segment. And when we come back, I want to talk to Topher a little bit about the reactions of people on the island toward the homeless and vice versa, and how those relationships can be improved. You're watching Global Connections. Please stay with us.
Inspired by an ancient culture, classical Chinese dance, vigorous physicality, timeless stories, 5,000 years of Chinese music and dance, Shen Yun presents authentic Chinese culture. Coming to Blaisdell Concert Hall, May 8th and 9th. Tickets at shenyun.com or call 808-792-3919.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the Think Tech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to Think Tech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the Think Tech Hawaii broadcast network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Welcome back to Global Connections. I'm David Lanu, and I'm talking to Dr. Topher Erickson about the issue of homelessness. We talked about his experience. Dr. Erickson has worked with the homeless in Minneapolis, in Washington, D.C., here in Honolulu, and has also worked with, looked at social service agencies in his role as an anthropologist overseas in Bangladesh. So he has a really unique perspective to bring to us. And Topher, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, having had this experience in Minneapolis, D.C., and here, how do people in different places react to the homeless? Are there differences between how people react here as opposed to other cities?
Yeah, I think there are cultural differences in every space. And this is really an unfair generalization, but in the East Coast, although DC is kind of southern, it's south of the Mason-Dixon line, but in the East Coast, there's a kind of do your own business sort of situation in terms of how people greet and interact with each other, strangers or not.
Right, they say Washington was the home of Southern efficiency and Northern hospitality.
That's right, exactly. It's true, it's very true. So how that manifests is that our sort of the appropriateness in which we can ignore people is higher, I think, in the East Coast settings. In Minneapolis, the quote-unquote Minnesota nice, right? And so you're supposed to be properly polite to people. And so if somebody comes up and asks you for money, for example, or is busking or trying to get your attention, Minnesotans have a tendency to say, I'm sorry, or I can't, or where somebody on the East Coast would just completely ignore them. Right. So those would be really sort of highlights of the kinds of differences. Where in Honolulu, I think it's really quite interesting because we see a huge conversion of tourists, and the big concern in Honolulu is how do tourists see our visibly homeless populations? And of course, how do residents feel about them as well? But obviously, the economic concern is that the homeless, visibly homeless individuals will contaminate the tourist industry or jeopardize it in some way. So there's
Is there any evidence that's true?
Oh, I would imagine. I can't quote any exact evidence, but yes, I think that what you'll see is anecdotal in terms of people feeling uncomfortable with being approached by somebody asking for anything, sure. Right? And the other thing is about stereotypes about who is homeless. And of course, we're talking about this person smells bad because they haven't bathed, their hygiene is very obvious, they're not wearing shoes, maybe their clothes are ratted. So that kind of, they're drunk, you can tell that they're using chemicals of some nature, or they're mentally ill. So all these sort of really obvious stereotypical signals that this is somebody that I don't want to talk to. And unfortunately, that's not the bulk of the people that are homeless, right? And that we know for sure. Mostly women are homeless, right? More women than men are homeless in terms of the numbers, more children. So we tend to have a stereotype about who those people are. But yeah, I think that in Honolulu or in Hawaii, the state and maybe the county, the city has gone to great lengths to restrict access to our visibly homeless populations. We've done many activities of cleaning them out, right? Making sure that they're gone. Even in places like Waianae and Waimanalo, where cleanups, quote unquote, are done to make sure that we don't have to engage this population.
And you know, we always seem to be talking about how local citizens, how tourists react to the homeless. What we don't talk a lot about is the viewpoint from their perspective.
Yeah.
And you've talked, obviously, to a lot of homeless people in various places in the country and the world, really.
Yeah.
Tell us about how they see it, how they see the reactions, and how they understand the reactions that they get.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, one of the things that's really hard to do is to empathize, right? It's to create a sense of empathy. And last week you had Michaela on, and she talked about making it human, right? Identifying with these populations or these people as if you too could be one of them. And I think that's a fantastic way to think about. Imagine just for a moment that all of your belongings are in a plastic bag.
Right.
You've had to reduce them all to a plastic bag, and now you've got to find a place for that plastic bag. I mean, everything. And you don't have a shower that's warm. So all of those things that are operating for you, but it's really important that people don't think that you're homeless, which in fact is a majority of the homeless population. Don't advertise. They're not interested in you knowing. So I guess my general impression is that, especially with youth, they're very keen on not letting you know that they're homeless. Mm-hmm. So quite possibly, we're interacting with people that are homeless or without housing far more frequently than you expect, and you have no idea, because they're interacting with you just as anybody else would, put together, acting as, you know, as they're busy doing whatever they need to be doing. Maybe they could use $5, and there might be signals that they're in trouble, or they could use a ride somewhere. But very rarely, and people that are that have quote unquote pride are not interested in disclosing. The folks that I think we, again, stereotype for being homeless, maybe what is going on for them? Well, I'm sure at that point they've lost any sort of sense of willingness to favor your comfort. And so at that point, they're just interested in meeting their needs, and however that works for them. So I think we, you know, for me, saying hello to somebody is, maybe it's my Minnesota, but if I look somebody in the eye and I know they're coming at me for money because I perceive them as drunk or homeless or in trouble, and I look at them and I say, hey, how are you doing? I disarm a whole lot of activity. And they might say, hey, do you have any money? And I can say, you know, no, I don't have, all I have is plastic. I hope you can do okay. I mean, a gesture like that can dramatically change the way in which that interaction unfolds.
You mentioned our guest last week, Dr. Michaela Rinkle from the social work school at HPU, and one of the things she said, and I think it's so true, that we talk about the homeless problem, but really homelessness has so many different moving parts and has so many different groups of people, and who ultimately are all, of course, individuals with their own stories, but there isn't really a homeless issue, is there? I mean, there are a number of homeless issues. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing, as she mentioned, and as the Homeless and Awareness Week is aiming to, houselessness is a key word in terms of understanding homelessness. Homelessness has its own stereotypes, its own sort of baggage, if you'd like. We understand who's homeless and we link it to certain things. Housing problems and affordable housing has another sort of much larger wrinkle, right? And as I've already talked about, how do we, I think a key thing is attitudes about, especially the stereotypes, but in general, our attitudes about housing and, if you'd like, our economic situation, our economic context. How close are, how stable are we in our own economic footing? And the economic picture of our own social experience, inequalities that could be manifested in ways that we really don't have a sense for until you're interacting. Again, homelessness, it's so key, and Homelessness Awareness Week, yes, it's true, we should be aware of it, but if you really want to get a ring, it's that we can turn it off, right? At the end of this week, we can all say, okay, I'm done. I've made myself aware, I'm finished. If you're without housing, it doesn't end, right? It does not end. It goes on and on and on, day after day and day after day. But if you have housing, you can exit the crisis, right? You can see it as a sympathetic moment, right? And that's fantastic, and it's really important. But the day-to-day experience of not having housing, I think, is the key sort of piece here. And I love that the Hawaii context has actually made an effort to call it we're houseless, we're not homeless, because the Aina, or the island, is our home. And of course that comes from the sovereignty movement, it comes from Hawaiian people in particular, but it's a wonderful way to rethink the problem that they are home, they're in Hawaii. They have a home, what they don't have is a house or a shelter.
Let's talk about something that you've heard and I've heard. Hawaii's not Minnesota. Minnesota's brutally cold. Here in Hawaii, it's more comfortable.
Yeah.
It's warmer. There are beaches. It never gets truly cold. So the claim is made that a lot or some number of the homeless are homeless by choice.
Yeah, I've certainly heard that. There's a couple of things to that. I have lots of reactions to that. There's another one that's a really interesting, and I would call it a folk tale, although there could be evidence, but I've never found it. People are sending their homeless problem to Hawaii. I've never seen actually anybody, I've never spoken to anybody that was their experience, but that certainly is a claim. But yes, it's so nice here. How bad could it be, right? Yeah, however, Hawaii, and Honolulu in particular, has gone to very great lengths to make it very difficult for people with laws and the like, of loitering, of urinating in public, laying down on park benches. They've restricted that by so they've done everything they can, and then these cleanups that happen. So you guys know about currently in Kaka'ako, there's now a group of people that are now living back there in Kaka'ako next to Next Step Shelter. We will see eventually they will be cleaned out, right? That area will be cleaned. And those kinds of projects happen very, very frequently. As soon as the community comes together and says, we have a space, and eventually the city will say, no, you can't stay here, you must move your stuff. That happened in 2006 in the Ala Moana Beach Park. So yeah, it's comfy and great and cozy, although without a cold shower, without the stability of your experience in any weather, although it seems warm here lately. I don't know if you felt it, but 60 is pretty cold. Now, coming from Minnesota, that's always problematic. But yeah, it's no fun. And then they stay on the street, not on the grass. They stay on the streets, especially in the urban settings. So, and cars, doubling up in other houses is another sort of other kinds of problem where you're staying in other people's homes, right? So as many as 15 to 20 people staying in a two-bedroom home. So there are other versions in which this is happening, this is unfolding, where it's not necessarily talked about as frequently. So yeah, I think the other thing that I now I've forgotten what I wanted to say, so I'll just pass and say that would be my reaction to that question.
Now, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, about a year ago, and they have signs all over the downtown area saying, don't give money to the homeless. Instead, they have these little parking meter things on some of the major streets. You're supposed to put your change in there with the idea that the money will end up going to social service agencies who will truly help the homeless. The implication being if you give it directly to the homeless, you're not only encouraging panhandling, but you're also facilitating possibly substance abuse. Is that something that you would be comfortable with here?
I think it's cool. I think it's a great idea. I like the logic of the idea. You can bet that if there's a group of homeless people and one of those quote unquote meters, one of those collection posts is erected, then the homeless people will leave that area and go somewhere else. So I would imagine that there's a logistical problem to that. But I like the idea. The worry, of course, for me, just as anything else, is who's controlling that money?
Sure.
And is that, who's controlling that money? And once that money is accumulated, and who knows how much it would be, how does it get allocated? So, as is always the problem with funding, is whose funding is that? And if you've ever made a contribution to an organization, you sort of want to know, this is going to go to this, right? And when you put it in a change box, you're really trusting that process. So, but I do like it. I like the idea to it. Certainly giving money directly to people that are using substances is a terrible disservice, right?
We only have about 20 seconds left.
Okay.
Let me ask you a very quick question. Are you optimistic that we will make progress here toward finding solutions for the problems that face the homeless?
I think what I would be optimistic about is changing attitudes. If we can change our attitudes about who is homeless and face that problem on a day-to-day basis in our own psyche, right, in our own essence as we're confronted with people that are less off than us, that's the big thing. Don't turn away. Don't ignore it, right? That I can be hopeful about, yeah.
Thanks so much, Topher Erickson of Hawaii Pacific University. Next, we're going to look at a psychological perspective on homelessness. This is Global Connections. Please stay with us.
Aloha, I'm Hunter Hevlin, host of Sustainable Hawaii here at Think Tech Hawaii. You can tune in every week on Thursday at 2 p.m. to see interviews with sustainability professionals from around the state and even further abroad, learning about activities with water management, food security, waste management, and a whole host of other fascinating opportunities to get engaged with making a greener island. So if you're interested in making the transition from consuming individuals to communities of producers, check us out every Thursday.
Aloha, Yappers, and a Happy New Year. I'm your host, King Zilly. From inner city out to the platform and now the Yacht Show. It's a new year, and most would say a new beginning. So this is a call to action. As we promote tech, energy, diversification, and globalism, with Think Tech Hawaii, the Yacht Show is all about advocacy for effective leadership, comprehensive youth policies, programs, and access to knowledge and information for upward social mobility, especially for the historically underprivileged youth. This means we'll be looking at young people making a difference in their community. Youth policies here in Hawaii, the country, and the world. We want to highlight youth programs that are meeting young people where they are, working together to accomplish a goal or tackle an issue while providing information and access to free educational content for anybody looking to learn on their own time, study for an exam, or simply refresh their memory. We do this by inviting everyday people like yourself, state policymakers, youth advocacy groups, youth programs, professionals, and so forth. But most importantly, we'll be partnering up with my new organization, causeeffect.org. More information on Cause Effect, as this website is currently in development in hopes to feature courses, seminars, tutorials, and conducting surveys that will be featured on the show. As we leave behind 2014, I wish I could say we leave behind issues such as police brutality, youth violence, education, economic mobility, and so many other hot-button topics that made 2014 a difficult year. So what does it mean for the new year? What does it mean for youth policy? What does it mean for Hawaii as a whole? And most importantly, how does it affect you and your community? We want you to tune into the Yacht Show at 3 p.m. Friday and find out. Aloha.
Hi, aloha. My name is Chris Leatham, and I host a show called The Economy and You. The show plays every Wednesday at noon, and on my show, I bring on guests who are interested or working in the technology space. And so I'd like you to come and watch the show and learn with me about all the sort of exciting things that we're doing in Hawaii to build and grow our economy ecosystem. So I'd like to say aloha, and I look forward to seeing you on the show. Thank you.
Hi, I'm your host on Think Tech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, Think Tech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world. and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Welcome back to Global Connections. I'm David Lanoux. I've been talking so far today about the homeless situation in Hawaii, so I want to remind you once again of Homelessness Awareness Week. Hawaii Pacific University is putting on a number of exhibitions, a movie, the movie The Soloist, and a play by one of our own HPU Professor of English, Mark Sharks. It's a play called Houseless in Paradise, and it's a play where the homeless actually speak in their own words. What Mark did is he did interviews with 60 or 70 homeless people, and he took their words and he brought them together to give you an idea through the medium of drama what it's like to be homeless, what it's like to be part of a homeless community. And the idea of community, I think, is very well represented there. If you have a chance, it's going to be on the Fort Street Mall. Please don't miss it. Well, we talked a little bit about with Topher Erickson, an anthropologist, about an anthropological view of homelessness and people's reactions to homelessness. I now would like to welcome Dr. Catherine Elmer. And
Hi.
Catherine is an assistant professor of psychology at Hawaii Pacific University. She got her PhD from the University of Texas at Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And tell us a little bit about your research.
Well, our lab is primarily focused in interpersonal relationships, so we like to look at things like race and hatred and how that can affect one's perceptions of another person, how it can affect one's own relationships and one's own feelings.
Okay, so in some sense, this really does apply to the way people view the homeless.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, a lot of people like to look at the homeless with a lot of disdain or
Right,
hatred, or what people might be more comfortable using words like contempt
Right.
when they look at the homeless. And there's sort of a dehumanizing there that helps protect somebody, basically, when they're looking at them with that kind of feeling.
Yeah, because you have this
feelings.
whole range, really. I mean, you have
Yeah.
people who are sympathetic,
Oh,
you
yeah.
have people who are concerned, you have
absolutely.
people who are, as you say, contemptuous.
Yeah.
You know,
Afraid.
get a job.
Yeah, exactly.
You have people who are afraid. You have people who are disgusted.
Yeah, exactly.
What, from your point of view as a psychologist, what sorts of feelings are evoked there? Why do different people react different ways?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it all depends on the person and their own experiences, of course. But when you think about things like hatred or with fear or disgust, there's a certain way when you start to look at somebody with those types of feelings that all of a sudden all of their actions get construed in a certain way. There's sort of this, there's this hypothesis known as the just world hypothesis in psychology, where we like to think that the world is a just place, where people get what they deserve. So if you work hard, you get good things. And if you just do nothing, you'll get bad things. So we like to, at least in our mind, justify if somebody's in a bad situation, they must have done something to get themselves in that place. So for us, a lot of it is, okay, look, if I see you with hatred, if I see you in a poor situation, you must have done something to get yourself there. So I'm justified in feeling negative towards you. And then it kind of helps us kind of alleviate the situation, at least for us, alleviate any responsibility towards helping that person.
And why do some people, on the other hand, respond sympathetically, where they want to help, they want to give money, they want to bring food?
Well, that's a great question. Well, it could be that they have better experience, really, maybe with that population, maybe with their own homes, maybe with their own values. There could be many different reasons, but I think a lot of it is they're just kind of aware of the situations that the person might have gone through in order to get into that place. So they want to help. They want to help alleviate that situation.
But there's a certain empathy there, too.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
What determines the levels of empathy that different people have?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, there's a branch in psychology, personality psychology, that likes to look at, okay, what's the different types of reasons for why people do the things they do, the habits that they have. I don't think there's a set personality for somebody who's going to be more helpful than others, but there are some general circumstances that tend to be at least circumstances that evoke more helpfulness from people. For example, we tend to be more helpful with women. We tend to want to be more helpful with children. Men, we kind of tend to not be as helpful to. And men and women actually differ gender-wise in how helpful they're going to be on average.
In what way?
Well, for example, men tend to be more. They want to be more likely. Now, no offense to any to guys or ladies out there, but men tend to want to be a little more heroic in their help, and so more public. While women want to tend to, on average, to be more interpersonal in their helpfulness. So there is differences in either even gender, how much people are willing to help in certain circumstances. Yeah.
And what about fear? I mean, I'll let you speak since you're the psychologist, but it strikes me that there are few motivations as profound and human as fear.
Oh, yeah.
And that fear can evoke very strong reactions.
Absolutely.
How does that play into people's interactions with the homeless?
Well, I think when you're looking at somebody who's homeless and all of a sudden you've evoked a sense of fear that now you're afraid, that can also cloud cloud your judgment, cloud what they do, your perceptions of them. It can make you basically resistant or at least reluctant to want to help somebody when you're afraid. It also puts you in kind of that circumstances where, look, they're the danger. They've done something wrong or something. So it also creates an otherness to that person. So fear can really kind of take over, and it's if you take it from an evolutionary standpoint or an evolutionary psychology standpoint, fear kind of says, okay, we need to get out of here. Where there's a danger, I need to either attack or I need to run, that type of thing. So fear is something you have to be cognizant of. But also at the same time, I think you kind of need to at least be able to recognize it in yourself and be able to let it go. Be like, hey, yeah, I'm afraid in the situation. Sure, I should be guarded, but it shouldn't be something that overtakes me in a public situation like this with homeless. Absolutely.
Let's talk about this concept of otherness, that we think of the homeless as being them
Yes.
as opposed to part of us.
Yeah.
Is there some kind of psychological benefit people derive from thinking of people in those terms?
Oh, absolutely. Well, it comes naturally to us to create a division of us versus them. It's a sense of security. It's a sense of establishing a sense of survival. So absolutely. When we see a them versus an us, it helps us better understand where our resources should go, where we should pay attention, how and when we should pay attention to somebody. Them gets clouded in a lot of ways, especially in social psychology. For them, when we see a them, all of a sudden they become all the same. They're homogenous. They're all either negative, and they're not very diverse. While our group, on the other hand, is diverse, positive, attractive. But then, on the other hand, no, we want to stay away from those people. So when we created them, it comes naturally for us, especially when we see a obvious difference. When you see somebody who's homeless, who's, for example, might have some hygiene issues or has a certain smell, it already creates a distinction. It's like, okay, that's a them, we're us over here. So it already sets you in that mind frame immediately. Absolutely.
But if you take the otherness to a certain extreme level,
Yeah.
it becomes, you talked about before,
Yeah.
dehumanization.
Absolutely, yes. So when you're dehumanizing somebody else like that, when you've created them, it puts you in a place where it's like, look, I don't have to help them. In fact, I shouldn't help them. I should stay away from these people. And it just kind of justifies a system in which we in our mind, we create stereotypes and images of them versus us. Yeah, absolutely.
And we think of, as we're talking to Dr. Erickson in the previous
Yeah.
segment, we think about, the homeless are substance abusers.
Oh, yeah.
Or they're
Yeah.
mentally ill.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's legitimate to think of them as other, or to think of them as not like me, or to be fearful of them.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it helps prevent us from basically engaging into that group, when in reality, like Topher was saying, or Erickson was saying that, yeah, I'm sorry, that in reality, a lot of the homeless, or at least the houseless, as he was saying, which I agree with that term, a lot of them are people that we know and we've interacted with on a day-to-day basis. One of my friends, actually, I found out several years ago that he was houseless. He didn't have a home. He didn't have a house. And I was just like, oh, I didn't know that. I've worked with him for several years. I didn't know he had a place. And I would have never thought, because in my mind, I had a certain stereotype that I was sort of upholding, and he didn't fit it. So I was like, oh, it was shocking for me. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you do research on racial bigotry.
Yes, yes.
In what ways is contempt for the homeless similar to racial bigotry, and in what ways is it different?
Well, both of them have to do with in-group versus out-groups sort of mentality. But in terms of racism, especially if you think about with the homeless, certain racial groups tend to be, on average, more likely to be homeless in Hawaii than other racial groups. I think this current statistics is it's mostly women, and actually people of Hawaiian descent tend to actually, on average, be more likely to be homeless than not. And when we have certain sort of racial views towards the people, we can sort of have that inform us of how we look at them. So if we have certain stereotypes about Hawaiians or about indigenous peoples, we can use that to justify how we feel towards the homeless, especially when we see them as more likely to be homeless. Yeah.
And what would you say to the folks who use your just world idea there, who say, well, it is a pretty just world. You get what you get what you deserve, and maybe it's a matter of personal responsibility.
That's a great point. The reality of the situation is, well, I wouldn't want to, I wouldn't want to hurt anyone's viewpoint of the world or shatter their viewpoint of the world too closely, but the reality is that a lot of good things and bad things happen to us serendipitously. We don't have complete control over our worlds, and that kind of viewpoint is dangerous to have. We can get incredibly stressed out thinking we can control all of our fortune and misfortune. In reality, we're going to always enter in situations where there could be a chance that we can have a lot of misfortune. And we have to at least recognize that as a possibility for us and a possibility for others, especially when we see a lot of homeless. We don't see the situations that they are in or what got them there to that point. Yeah.
Well, Catherine, we could talk about this for another hour. I wish we could, but it's been great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you very much for watching. This is Global Connections. I'm David Lanoux.